The knock came just after midnight. I was already awake. Insomnia had become a familiar companion on the farm, so I heard the car pull up the gravel drive before I saw the headlights sweep across my bedroom wall. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one came out here unannounced, especially not at this hour. I pulled on jeans and walked to the door, my mind running through possibilities. Emergency. Wrong address. Someone lost. I opened the door. Clara stood on my porch, hands shoved deep in the pockets of a coat too thin for late September. She looked older than I remembered, not in a bad way, just worn, like she'd been carrying something heavy for too long. "Lucas," she said. Her voice was steady. No tears, no panic, just tired. "Clara." I hadn't seen her in 8 years, not since my mother's funeral. She looked past me into the house, then back at my face. "I need your help," she said. "I know how this sounds. I know we haven't spoken in years, but I'm out of options." I should have asked what she meant. Should have told her to come back in the morning. But something in her expression stopped me. Something that looked less like desperation and more like surrender. "I need a baby," she said, "or I lose everything." I didn't close the door. I didn't ask her to leave. I just stepped aside and let her in. What she told me next would unravel the quiet life I'd built, and maybe, in some strange way, put both of us back together. But to understand why I didn't say no, you need to know how I got here. My name is Lucas Brennan, and I've lived alone on this farm for 4 years now. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Growing up, I always figured I'd leave, go to college, find work in a city somewhere, build a life that didn't revolve around cattle and fence posts and the same stretch of land my grandfather bought in 1952. But life doesn't always follow the plan you sketch out at 18. My parents died when I was 28. Car accident on Route 9, black ice, gone in an instant. They were coming back from a trip to see my aunt in Pennsylvania. My father was 61. My mother was 58. They'd just started talking about retiring, about maybe selling the farm and buying something smaller near the coast. I was working construction in Asheville at the time, sharing an apartment with 2 guys I barely knew, dating a woman who wanted me to propose but couldn't understand why I sent half my paycheck home every month. After the funeral, I came back to settle the estate. I was only planning to stay a few weeks, just long enough to get the property listed, sort through their things, tie up loose ends. But I never left. Something about walking through that empty house, seeing my mother's coffee mug still on the counter, my father's boots by the door, it broke something open in me. Or maybe it just made me realize what I'd been running from. This place had always felt like an anchor when I wanted to be drifting. But standing there in the silence, I understood. It wasn't an anchor. It was a foundation. So I stayed. The first year was the hardest. I didn't know half of what I needed to know about running a cattle farm. My father had always handled the business side. Sales, contracts, vet visits, feed orders. I'd helped with the physical labor growing up, sure, but I'd never paid attention to the details. I made mistakes, lost money, had to sell off a portion of the herd just to stay afloat. But slowly, I learned. I wake up at 5 every morning. The alarm goes off, and I'm up before I fully register the sound. Coffee first, black, no sugar, in the same chipped mug I've used since high school. I stand at the kitchen window and watch the sky lighten over the hills, the fog sitting low in the pastures like a blanket someone forgot to pull back. By 6, I'm outside, feeding the cattle, checking the water troughs, walking the fence line to look for breaks or weak posts. This time of year, the mornings are cold enough that my breath fogs in front of me, and the grass crunches underfoot. I like it. There's a simplicity to the work, a clarity. You do the thing that needs doing, and it's done. No politics, no posturing, no one asking you to be someone you're not. Most days I don't see another person. There's Jim, the vet, who comes by once a month to check on the herd. There's the guy at the feed store in town, a quiet man in his 60s who never asks questions, just loads the bags into my truck and nods. Occasionally, I'll run into someone I went to high school with at the gas station or the grocery store. We'll exchange pleasantries. How's the farm? Good, keeping busy. And that'll be the end of it. I'm not lonely. At least, that's what I tell myself. It's just that loneliness and solitude aren't the same thing, and I've learned to live in the latter, without mistaking it for the former. Solitude is functional. It's waking up and knowing exactly what the day holds. It's not having to explain yourself, not having to compromise, not having to navigate someone else's expectations or moods or needs. I tried dating after I moved back. There was a woman named Sarah, a teacher in town. We went out a few times. Dinners, a movie, a hike up to Laurel Point. She was kind, pretty, easy to talk to. But after a month, she started hinting that maybe I should think about selling the farm, moving closer to town, finding work that didn't keep me so isolated. "You're too young to live like this," she said one night over drinks. "Don't you want more?" I didn't know how to tell her that I didn't. Not in the way she meant. We stopped seeing each other after that. There were a couple of others over the years, brief, half-hearted attempts at connection that fizzled out before they ever really began. It wasn't that I didn't want companionship. I did, but I wanted someone who understood that this life wasn't a compromise or a phase. It was a choice, and most people couldn't see it that way, so I stopped trying. Evenings are quiet. I cook simple meals, steak, potatoes, whatever vegetables I picked up on my last trip to town. I eat at the kitchen table, sometimes with the radio on, sometimes in silence. After dinner, I read. My father's old westerns mostly, or history books I order online. Sometimes I'll watch a game on the old TV in the living room, the one with the antenna that only picks up 3 channels on a good day. By 9, I'm in bed. It's a small life, I know. Contained, predictable, but it's mine. And for 4 years, it was enough. Until Clara knocked on my door at midnight and asked me for something I never thought anyone would ask. Before I tell you what happened next, do me a favor. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love hearing from you all. And if you're finding this worthwhile, hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps me keep bringing you these stories. Now let me tell you what changed everything. Clara stood in my kitchen looking like she hadn't slept in days. I put the kettle on. Coffee seemed too aggressive for whatever conversation we were about to have, and gestured for her to sit. She did, slowly, like her body was running on fumes. She set a small leather bag on the floor beside her chair and folded her hands on the table. "I'm sorry for showing up like this," she said. "I know it's been years. I know this is—" "It's fine," I said, though I had no idea if it was. "Just tell me what's going on." She took a breath, steadying herself. "My Aunt Patricia died 6 months ago. You probably don't remember her. She lived in Virginia, never came around much. But she left me everything in her will, her house, some land, investments. A lot of money, Lucas. Enough to change my life." I poured hot water over tea bags, set a mug in front of her. "That sounds like good news." "It would be," she said. "Except there's a condition." I sat down across from her and waited. "The will states that I only inherit if I have a biological child by the time I turn 40. She looked me straight in the eye. "I turned 40 in 6 months. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. "Patricia never had kids," Clara continued. "She was difficult, traditional. She always thought I was wasting my life, focusing on my career, not settling down, not giving her a grandniece or grandnephew to fawn over. I guess this was her way of trying to control me even after she was gone." Her voice was flat, matter of fact. "If I don't meet the condition, everything goes to a cousin I've never even met. That's—" I stopped myself. "That's cruel." "It is," she agreed, "but it's legal." The lawyers confirmed it. I wrapped my hands around my own mug, trying to process. "You've been trying, then, to have a baby?" "For the last 4 months, yes." She looked down at her tea. "I went to a fertility clinic, tried with a sperm donor. 3 rounds of IUI. Nothing took. They said my egg quality isn't great. Age, stress, who knows. They recommended IVF, but that takes time I don't have. And even then, there's no guarantee." "What about—" I hesitated. "I mean, is there someone? A partner or—" She shook her head. "I broke up with someone 2 years ago. It was a long time coming. Since then, I've been alone. By choice, mostly. I threw myself into work. Marketing director for a tech firm in Charlotte. 60-hour weeks, constant travel. It felt easier than trying to figure out what I actually wanted. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. "So why me?" I asked finally. Clara looked up. Her eyes were tired, but there was something else there too. Something like resolve. "Because you're the only person I trust to do this without making it complicated. You're steady, Lucas. You always have been. Even when we were younger, when your mom and I would sit at this table and talk for hours, you were just solid. reliable, not trying to be anything you weren't. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I'm not asking for a relationship. I'm not asking for money or support or anything beyond this one thing. I just need... She trailed off, then started again. I need a chance, a real one, and I know how insane this sounds. Believe me, I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times. But you're the only person I could think of who might understand. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not panic, exactly, but the weight of what she was asking. Clara, I said slowly, this isn't just about you. If there's a child... I know, she said quickly, and I've thought about that too. If you want to be involved, we can figure that out. If you don't, I'll respect that. I'll put it in writing, legally, whatever you need. I'm not trying to trap you into anything. Her voice cracked slightly, the first sign of emotion breaking through. I don't have anyone else. I wanted to say no. Every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to say no, that this was too much, too complicated, too strange, that I barely knew this woman anymore, that 8 years was a long time, that people changed. But I kept thinking about my mother. She and Clara had been close. Clara used to come out to the farm when I was in high school, and the two of them would sit on the porch for hours, talking and laughing about things I was too young to care about. My mother always spoke highly of her, said she was smart, kind, too hard on herself. After Clara moved to Charlotte for work, they stayed in touch. My mother went to visit her once, came back saying Clara was doing well but seemed lonely. She works too much, my mother had said. She's afraid to stop moving. I looked at Clara now, this exhausted, desperate woman sitting in my kitchen at midnight, and I saw exactly what my mother had meant. When? I asked. Clara blinked. When what? When would this need to happen? She swallowed hard. Tonight. The word hung in the air between us. I've been tracking everything, she said quickly, as if she needed to explain before I could object. Ovulation, timing, all of it. Tonight it's the window, my best chance this month. Maybe my only real chance before time runs out. She looked at me with something that wasn't quite hope, but wasn't quite resignation either. I know it's absurd. I know I'm asking the impossible, but I drove 4 hours to get here because I genuinely don't know what else to do. I should have said no. I should have told her to go to a hotel, get some sleep, think about this with a clear head in the morning. I should have said that this wasn't fair to either of us, that desperation wasn't a good foundation for a decision this big, but I didn't. Instead, I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark fields beyond. Okay, I said quietly. Behind me, I heard Clara's breath catch. Okay? I turned to face her. I'm not saying I understand this, and I'm not saying it's not terrifying, but yeah, okay. For the first time since she'd arrived, something in her expression softened. Not relief exactly, but a loosening of the tension she'd been carrying. She stood, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then she nodded. Thank you, she whispered. And just like that, everything changed. Clara didn't leave the next morning. I woke up at 5 like always, slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, and went through my routine. Coffee, boots, jacket. When I came back inside an hour later to grab breakfast, she was sitting at the kitchen table, already dressed, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Morning, she said. Morning. I poured myself another cup of coffee, uncertain. You sleep okay? Better than I have in months, actually. She looked around the kitchen, at the old wooden cabinets and the sunlight slanting through the window. It's quiet here. Yeah, I said. It is. There was a pause, not awkward exactly, but weighted with the strangeness of what had happened between us just hours before. I should probably get going, she said, though she made no move to stand. Let you get back to your day. You don't have to rush off, I heard myself say. I mean, if you want to stay for breakfast, that's fine, or rest a little longer, whatever you need. She looked at me, something unreadable in her expression. Then she nodded. Breakfast sounds good. I made eggs and toast. We ate in silence. Not uncomfortable, just quiet. The kind of quiet that happens between two people who aren't quite sure what they are to each other yet. After breakfast, she helped me clean up without being asked. Then she stood by the door, car keys in hand, and hesitated. Lucas, she said, would it be okay if I stayed? Just for a few days. To make sure, she stopped, seeming embarrassed. To make sure it took. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I want to be certain before I go back to the city and face everything waiting for me there. I should have thought harder about what I was agreeing to. But something in her request felt less like an imposition and more like a confession. She wasn't ready to go back. Not yet. Yeah, I said. You can stay. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. That was 3 weeks ago. The first few days we moved around each other carefully. Like two people learning to share space they'd each grown used to occupying alone. Clara stayed in the guest room. My old bedroom, actually. The one I'd slept in as a kid. I'd cleared it out years ago, but it still had the same quilt my grandmother made, the same view of the eastern pasture. She'd wake up early, earlier than I expected. I'd find her on the porch with coffee, watching the sun come up over the hills. You don't have to get up this early, I told her on the third morning. I know, she said, but I like it. It's the first time in years I've woken up and not immediately felt anxious about the day ahead. I didn't push her on it. I just handed her a travel mug and told her if she was going to be up anyway, she might as well come help me feed the cattle. She looked at me like I'd just invited her on an adventure. Seriously? Why not? So she came. At first, she mostly watched, stayed back while I filled troughs and checked fences, asked questions about the herd, about how the operation worked. But by the end of the week, she was helping, hauling feed bags, fixing a gate hinge that had come loose, learning the names I'd given to some of the cows. You named them? She asked, incredulous. Some of them. I pointed to a big Hereford standing near the fence. That's Mabel. She's bossy. And that one over there is Hank. He's lazy but sweet. Clara laughed. A real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere genuine. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh since she'd arrived, and the sound of it made something in my chest ease. You're a softie, she said. Maybe. She smiled at me, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the person she must have been before life got so heavy, before deadlines and pressure and impossible conditions in a will. By the second week, a routine had formed. We'd have coffee together in the mornings, then head out to work. Clara was surprisingly capable. She didn't shy away from hard labor, didn't complain when her hands got dirty or when the work ran long. If anything, she seemed to crave it, like the physicality of the tasks gave her something to focus on, other than the uncertainty hanging over her head. Afternoons, we'd come back to the house, make lunch. Sometimes she'd cook, simple things, pasta or sandwiches, and sometimes I would. We didn't talk much during the day, but in the evenings, after dinner, that's when the conversation started. We'd sit on the porch, the sky going dark, the sound of crickets filling the silence between words. One night, she told me about her job. I was good at it, she said. Really good. I could read people, figure out what they wanted, craft a message that would land. I built campaigns that won awards, made the company millions. She paused, staring out at nothing, but it never felt like enough. There was always another project, another deadline, another exec who needed something yesterday. I kept thinking if I just worked a little harder, stayed a little later, proved myself one more time, I'd finally feel secure. Did you? I asked. She shook her head. No, I just felt emptier. I understood that more than I wanted to admit. Another night I told her about Sarah, about the other women I'd tried and failed to build something with, about how it always seemed to come down to the same issue. They wanted me to be someone different, someone who wanted more than what I had. They weren't wrong to want that, I said. I just couldn't give it to them. Clara looked at me for a long time. I don't think you're wrong for wanting what you want, she said quietly. I think you're just honest about it. That's rarer than people realize. Something in her voice made me think she wasn't just talking about me. By the third week, the careful distance we'd maintained started to collapse. Not in a dramatic way, just in small moments, her hand brushing mine when we both reached for the coffee pot, the way she'd lean against the kitchen counter while I cooked, talking about nothing in particular, how she started sitting closer on the porch, her shoulder almost touching mine. One afternoon, we were mending a section of fence that had come down during a storm. It was hot, mid-September sun beating down, and we'd been at it for hours. Clara pulled off her work gloves and wiped sweat from her forehead. I used to hate this kind of work, she said. Physical labor, I mean. I always thought it was beneath me, like I was supposed to be doing something more important. And now, she looked at the fence, then at me. Now I think maybe this is the most important thing I've done in years. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just handed her a water bottle. She took a long drink, then said, "I don't want to go back, Lucas." The words hung there between us. "Back to Charlotte?" I asked. "Back to any of it." She set the bottle down, her expression raw. The job, the pressure, the constant feeling that I'm one mistake away from losing everything. "I don't want that life anymore. So don't go back," I said. She laughed, but it was hollow. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because I don't know what else I'd do. Because that life is all I've built. Because if I walk away, what do I even have?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw it clearly for the first time. She wasn't just here because of the baby. She was here because this place, this quiet, simple life, had given her something she hadn't felt in years. Permission to stop. "You have more than you think," I said. She met my eyes, and I saw something shift. Not hope exactly, but possibility. That night after dinner, we sat on the porch longer than usual. The air had cooled, and Clara wrapped herself in one of my old flannels, the sleeves hanging past her hands. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Why did you say yes? That first night? You could have told me to leave. You should have." I'd thought about that question a lot over the past few weeks, and I still wasn't sure I had a good answer. "My mom used to say you were one of the strongest people she knew," I said finally. "But she also said you carried too much. That you didn't know how to let people help you." I paused. "When you showed up here, you weren't asking me to save you. You were asking me to give you a chance. And I thought if I could do that, I should." Clara's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She just nodded, like she understood something she hadn't been able to put into words herself. "I'm glad I came here," she said softly. "Me too." And I meant it. The days continued to blur together in the best way. We worked side by side, ate meals across from each other, sat in comfortable silences that didn't need filling. Clara started sleeping better. I could tell by the way her face had softened, the tension in her shoulders slowly unwinding. One morning I found her in the kitchen before dawn, staring out the window at the fields. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. "No, I just wanted to watch the sunrise." She glanced at me. "Is that weird?" "Not at all." She smiled. "I don't think I've watched the sun come up in years. Not like this anyway. Not without immediately thinking about all the things I had to do that day." I poured us both coffee and stood beside her. We watched the sky lighten in silence, pale orange bleeding into soft pink, the fog lifting slowly off the pasture. "This is enough," she said quietly. "Just this." I knew exactly what she meant. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning, 3.5 weeks after Clara had arrived. We were in the barn checking on a calf that had been born the night before, when I heard her phone buzzing in her pocket. She'd been ignoring calls for days. I'd noticed but hadn't said anything. This time, though, she looked at the screen and her whole body tensed. "I have to take this," she said, her voice tight. She stepped outside and I stayed with the calf, giving her privacy. But even from inside the barn, I could hear fragments of the conversation, her voice rising, defensive at first, then tired. When she came back in, her face had changed. The lightness that had been building over the past few weeks was gone, replaced by something harder. "Everything okay?" I asked. "My cousin," she said flatly. "David, he's my aunt's lawyer. He's been checking up on things." "Checking up how?" She leaned against the barn wall, arms crossed. "Apparently someone told him I've been out of the office for weeks. He wanted to know where I was, what I was doing, whether I was taking the terms of the will seriously." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that I'm taking care of myself, that the will doesn't specify how I have to have a child, just that I need to have one." She exhaled sharply. He didn't like that answer. "What's his problem?" Clara's laugh was bitter. "He stands to inherit everything if I don't meet the conditions, so he has every reason to want me to fail." I didn't like the sound of that. "Can he do anything? Legally?" "I don't know." She pushed off the wall, restless now. "He's implying that I need to prove I'm acting in good faith, that I can't just manufacture a situation to meet the terms. He mentioned hiring an investigator to verify my circumstances." "An investigator?" "To make sure I'm really pregnant. To make sure it's legitimate." She ran a hand through her hair, frustrated. "God, this is exactly what I was trying to avoid. I just wanted a few weeks to breathe, to figure things out without the whole world watching. But of course, that's too much to ask." I wanted to tell her it would be fine, that David couldn't touch her, but I didn't know if that was true. Instead, I just said, "You don't owe him an explanation." Maybe not, but if he pushes this, if he makes things difficult, I could lose everything anyway. The lawyers told me the language in the will is subjective enough that it could be challenged, and David has the money to drag this out for years if he wants to. The weight of it settled over both of us. For weeks we'd existed in a kind of bubble, separate from the world, insulated from the pressure and expectations that had driven Clara here in the first place. But reality was closing in. David showed up 3 days later. I was repairing a section of the water line near the house when a black Audi pulled up the drive, polished and out of place against the dirt and gravel. A man in his early 40s stepped out, tailored suit, expensive watch, the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. "Lucas Brennan?" he called out. I set down my wrench and walked over. "That's me." He extended a hand. "David Mercer, Clara's cousin. I don't think we've met." I shook his hand, but there was nothing warm about it. "What can I do for you?" "I'm here to see Clara, actually. Is she around?" "She's inside." He glanced toward the house, then back at me. "I'll wait out here if you don't mind letting her know." I didn't like the way he said it, like he was doing me a favor by not barging in. But I went inside and found Clara in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread she'd started making in the afternoons. "David's here," I said, her hand stilled. "Here? At the farm?" "Yeah, outside." She wiped her hands on a towel, her jaw tight. "Of course he is." She walked past me without another word, and I followed her out. David was leaning against his car, scrolling through his phone. When he saw Clara, he straightened, slipping the phone into his pocket. "Clara," he said, his tone smooth. "You're looking well." "What do you want, David?" "Just checking in. You've been off the grid for a few weeks, and people are starting to ask questions. Your office, your friends, the estate lawyers. I thought I'd come see for myself that you're handling things appropriately." "I'm fine," Clara said, "and what I'm doing is none of your business." David's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, it is my business. The will stipulates that you need to have a child to inherit. It doesn't say anything about running off to the middle of nowhere and playing house." I felt my hands clench, but Clara's voice stayed calm. "I'm well aware of what the will says." "Are you?" He glanced at me, then back at her. "Because from where I'm standing, this looks less like a good faith effort and more like, I don't know, desperation? A shortcut?" "Careful," I said, my voice low. David turned to me, eyebrows raised. "I'm sorry, is this your business?" "It is when you show up on my property and start making accusations." "I'm not accusing anyone of anything," David said, his tone measured. "I'm simply pointing out that the terms of the will are open to interpretation, and if Clara's actions seem questionable, the estate could be contested. I'm sure you understand." Clara stepped forward, her voice hard now. "You want me to fail, David. Let's not pretend this is about protecting Patricia's wishes. You've wanted that inheritance since the day she died, and you're pissed that she left it to me instead of you. That's not fair." "It's completely fair." Her voice cracked slightly, but she held her ground. "You didn't visit her. You didn't call. You didn't care about her until you found out what she was worth. So don't stand here and lecture me about good faith." For a moment, David said nothing. Then he straightened his tie, his expression cooling. "Think what you want," he said. "But I've already spoken to the estate lawyers. If there's any indication that you're attempting to manipulate the terms of the will, they'll open an investigation. And if that happens, Clara, you'll lose everything. Not because I want you to, but because you brought it on yourself." He walked back to his car, paused with his hand on the door. "I'd think carefully about your next steps. You have less time than you think." Then he got in and drove away, leaving dust hanging in the air. Clara didn't say anything for a long time. She just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the empty driveway. "He's going to make this impossible," she said finally, her voice hollow. "Even if I do everything right, he'll find a way to challenge it, to drag me through court, to make me prove every single thing. I'll spend the next year fighting him instead of—" She trailed off. "Instead of what?" I asked gently. She looked at me, and I saw the exhaustion in her eyes. Not physical, but emotional, the kind that comes from carrying a weight for too long. "Instead of living," she said quietly. I wanted to fix it, to tell her we'd figure it out, that David couldn't win, that everything would be okay. but I didn't know if that was true, and lying to her wouldn't help. "What do you want to do?" I asked instead. She shook her head. "I don't know." Over the next few days, the pressure continued to build. Clara started getting calls again. Lawyers, her office, friends she hadn't spoken to in months. Each conversation left her more drained than the last. She'd retreat to the guest room and I'd hear her pacing, her voice muffled through the door. One night I found her on the porch long after dark, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at nothing. "Can't sleep?" I asked. "Can't stop thinking," she said. I sat down beside her. For a while we didn't speak. Then she said, "I took a test this morning." My heart jumped. "And?" "Negative." Her voice was flat. "It's still early, but I don't know. Maybe it didn't work. Maybe I'm just running out of time and there's nothing I can do about it." "Clara, I've been thinking about just giving up," she said, cutting me off. "Selling everything, walking away, starting over somewhere else. Somewhere no one knows me, where I don't have to prove anything to anyone." She pulled the blanket tighter. "Maybe that's what I should have done from the beginning." "You don't mean that, don't I?" She looked at me and there were tears in her eyes now. "What am I even fighting for, Lucas? A pile of money? A house I don't want? The approval of people who don't care about me?" "You're fighting because it's yours," I said. "Because your aunt left it to you and you deserve it." "Do I?" Her voice broke. "Because it doesn't feel like it. It feels like I'm just trying to be someone I'm not, trying to meet some impossible standard that was designed to make me fail." I didn't have an answer for that, because part of me wondered if she was right. But I couldn't let her give up. Not like this. "You came here for a reason," I said, "and it wasn't just about the inheritance. You came here because you needed to get away from all of that. Because you needed space to figure out what you actually want." I paused. "Have you figured it out?" She was quiet for a long time. Then, so softly I almost didn't hear it, she said, "I think so." "What is it?" She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw something I hadn't seen before. Something fragile but real. "I want to stop running," she whispered. "I want to stop trying to prove myself. I just want to rest." And in that moment, I understood exactly what she meant. Because I'd spent 4 years building a life where I didn't have to prove anything to anyone, where I could just exist, simply and quietly, without justification, and somehow, without meaning to, I'd given that to her too. The breaking point came on a Sunday night, exactly 4 weeks after Clara had arrived. She'd been quiet all day, not in the comfortable way we'd grown used to, but in a way that felt fragile, like she was holding herself together by sheer force of will. We'd worked through the morning, barely speaking. At lunch, she picked at her food. By evening, I found her standing in the guest room, staring at her half-packed suitcase on the bed. "Clara?" She didn't turn around. "I think I need to go back," she said, her voice flat. "Tomorrow. Before I make this any worse." I stepped into the room. "Worse how?" "David's already building a case. The longer I stay here, the more ammunition I give him. And if I'm not pregnant," her voice caught. "If this didn't work, then I've just been hiding, wasting time I don't have." "You're not hiding, aren't I?" She finally turned to face me and I saw how close she was to breaking. "I came here because I was desperate and alone and didn't know what else to do. And you've been so kind, Lucas. You've given me more than I had any right to ask for. But I can't keep pretending that staying here fixes anything. The reality is still waiting for me back in Charlotte. The lawyers, David, the job I've been ignoring, all of it. So what are you going to do? Go back and let them grind you down until there's nothing left? What choice do I have?" she said, and there were tears in her eyes now. "I can't stay here forever. This isn't my life, it's yours. It could be yours too." The words came out before I'd fully thought them through, but as soon as I said them, I knew they were true. She stared at me. "Lucas, I'm serious." I took a step closer. "You said you don't want to go back to that life, so don't. Stay here." "I can't just—" "Why not?" I could hear the intensity in my own voice now. "You keep saying you're out of options, but you're not. You have this option. You have this place. You have—" I stopped, trying to find the right words. "You have me." Clara shook her head, but I saw the conflict in her face. The part of her that wanted to believe me fighting against the part that had learned not to hope for things like this. "You don't know what you're offering," she said quietly. "I'm a mess, Lucas. I'm carrying all this weight, all these expectations. If I stay, that doesn't just disappear. David will keep pushing. The lawyers will keep demanding answers. My job. God, I haven't even told them I'm thinking about quitting. There are so many loose ends, so many things I'd have to untangle, and you'd be caught in the middle of all of it. I know. And you're still saying stay? Yes. She looked at me like she was trying to understand something fundamental, something she'd maybe never quite understood before. Why? I thought about how to answer that, about all the reasons I could give her. Practical ones, logical ones. But in the end, the truth was simpler than that. Because for the first time in 4 years I don't wake up to an empty house, I said. Because I like having you here. Because when you're here, this place feels less like a place I'm just existing in, and more like somewhere I actually want to be. I paused. And because I think you feel the same way. Her breath hitched. I do, she whispered. I feel more myself here than I have in years. But Lucas, that doesn't mean it's fair to you. What if the baby? What if I'm not pregnant? What if all of this was for nothing? Then we try again, I said simply. Or we don't. Either way, you don't have to face it alone. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. I closed the distance between us, close enough now that I could see the tears threatening to spill over. Clara, listen to me. I'm not asking you to have all the answers. I'm not asking you to fix everything tonight. I'm just asking you to stop running, to stop thinking you have to carry all of this by yourself. I don't know how to do that, she said, her voice breaking. Then let me show you. The tears came then, silent and steady. She covered her face with her hands, and I did the only thing I could think to do. I pulled her into my arms and held her while she cried. She cried for a long time. For all the pressure she'd been under. For all the years she'd spent trying to be enough. For all the ways the world had told her she was failing. And I just held her, one hand on her back, the other in her hair, and let her finally break. When she was done, when the tears had slowed and her breathing had evened out, she pulled back just enough to look at me. I'm terrified, she said. I know. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough? You are, I said firmly. You're one of the strongest people I know. You just need to stop trying to be strong alone. She searched my face and I saw the moment something shifted in her. The moment she let herself believe, just a little, that maybe this could work. If I stay, she said slowly, things are going to get complicated. David's not going to back off. The lawyers will want documentation, proof, answers. It's going to be messy. I can handle messy. And if I lose the inheritance anyway, if David finds a way to take it all, then we'll figure it out, I said. You think I care about the money? Clara, I've lived on this farm for 4 years on what most people would consider nothing. I'm not worried about losing something I never wanted in the first place. She laughed, a small, wet sound, but real. You're insane. Maybe, I smiled. But so are you, and look how well that's working out. She shook her head, but she was smiling now too. Tentative and fragile, but there. I don't deserve you. You do, I said. You just haven't let yourself believe it yet. For a long moment we just stood there, her hands still resting on my chest, my arms still around her. The room was quiet except for the distant sound of crickets outside and the soft creak of the old house settling. Okay, she said finally. Okay? Okay, I'll stay. She took a shaky breath. I don't know how this is going to work. I don't know what happens next, but I'll stay. Something in my chest loosened. Something I hadn't realized I'd been holding so tightly. We'll figure it out, I said. One day at a time. She nodded, and then without warning she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against mine. We stood like that for a while, breathing together, anchored to each other in a way that felt both new and inevitable. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For not giving up on me. I pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. I'm not going anywhere, Clara, that's a promise. And I meant it. The next morning everything felt different. Not in some grand, transformative way. The sun still rose at the same time. The cattle still needed feeding. The fence still had weak spots that needed attention. But the heaviness that had been hanging over Clara was lighter now. Not gone, but manageable. She called her office first thing and told them she was taking a leave of absence. She didn't give them details, just said she needed time to deal with a family matter. They weren't happy about it, but she held firm. Then she called the estate lawyers and told them she was still complying with the terms of the will, that she would provide updates as needed, and that any further communication from David Mercer should go through her directly. Her voice was steady, Clear. She wasn't asking for permission anymore. She was stating facts. When she hung up, she looked at me and said, "That felt good." "Yeah?" "Yeah." She smiled. A real smile. The kind that reached her eyes. I think I forgot what it feels like to set a boundary and not immediately apologize for it. "Get used to it," I said. Over the next week, we fell back into our routine, but it felt different now. There was an ease between us that hadn't been there before, a sense that we were building something together rather than just existing in parallel. Clara started making plans, real ones. She called a realtor in Charlotte and listed her condo. She reached out to a few friends she'd lost touch with, not to explain herself, but just to reconnect. She even started talking about what she might do if she stayed long-term. Maybe freelance consulting, maybe something else entirely. She didn't have all the answers, but she was asking the questions, and that felt like progress. And then, 2 weeks after she decided to stay, she came out of the bathroom one morning holding a small plastic stick, her hands shaking. "Lucas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked up from my coffee. "What is it?" She held up the test and I saw the 2 pink lines. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I set down my mug, crossed the kitchen and pulled her into my arms. She was crying again, but this time it wasn't from exhaustion or fear. It was relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. "We did it," she whispered against my shoulder. "We actually did it." "We did," I said, and I felt something settle in my chest, something that felt a lot like hope. 6 months later, I woke to the sound of Clara moving around the kitchen. It was early, just past 5, but she'd been waking up earlier than usual in these final weeks of pregnancy, restless and uncomfortable, unable to sleep for more than a few hours at a time. I pulled on a sweatshirt and found her at the stove making tea, one hand pressed against the small of her back. "You okay?" I asked. She glanced over her shoulder and smiled. "Just couldn't get comfortable. And I figured if I was awake, I might as well make myself useful." "You don't have to be useful at 5 in the morning." "I know." She poured the tea, handed me a cup. "But I wanted to watch the sunrise with you." We went out to the porch together, wrapped in blankets against the March cold. The sky was just beginning to lighten, pale gray bleeding into soft gold at the edges. The pastures were still, the cattle just starting to stir. "I never get tired of this," Clara said quietly. "Yeah," I said. "Me neither." She leaned against me, and I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, feeling the swell of her belly against my side. It still felt surreal sometimes, the fact that in a few weeks there would be a baby, that our lives were about to change in ways we couldn't fully predict, but it didn't feel scary. Not anymore. The inheritance had come through 2 months ago, after a lengthy review process initiated by David. The estate lawyers had investigated, interviewed Clara, reviewed documentation. David had pushed hard, arguing that the circumstances were suspicious, that Clara hadn't acted in good faith. But in the end, the facts were simple. Clara was pregnant. The child was biologically hers, and she had met the terms of the will. The lawyers found no legal basis to contest it. David had threatened to appeal, but his own lawyer advised him he didn't have a case. So he'd backed off, and the property, the investments, all of it, had transferred to Clara's name. She'd sold most of it almost immediately. "I don't need it," she'd told me. "I never did. I just needed to know I wasn't going to lose everything because I didn't fit into someone else's idea of what my life should look like." She'd kept a small portion, enough to give her security, to invest in the farm, to make sure we had what we needed for the baby. The rest she'd donated, quietly and without fanfare. A women's shelter, a literacy program, a fund for single mothers pursuing education. Patricia would have hated that, Clara had said with a small smile. But I think my mom would have loved it. The farm had changed too. We'd fixed the old barn, reinforced the fencing, invested in better equipment. Clara had started a small side business, consulting for agricultural co-ops on marketing and outreach. It wasn't corporate, wasn't high pressure, but it used her skills in a way that felt meaningful. And it let her work from home on her own schedule. We weren't rich, we probably never would be, but we had enough. Enough land, enough work, enough quiet, enough of each other. Clara's water broke on a Tuesday afternoon while we were fixing a gate latch. She stopped mid-sentence, looked down, then looked at me with wide eyes. I think it's time. I'd prepared for this. We'd packed a hospital bag weeks ago, mapped out the route, talked through the plan. But in the moment, my mind went blank for about 3 seconds before kicking back into gear. "Okay," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "Okay, let's get you to the truck." She laughed. Actually laughed as I helped her toward the house. "You're panicking." "I'm not panicking." "You're definitely panicking." "Maybe a little." The drive to the hospital felt both endless and impossibly fast. Clara breathed through the contractions, her hand gripping mine, and I drove as carefully as I could while also feeling like I might explode from the adrenaline. Labor took 14 hours. Long, exhausting hours where I felt completely useless except to hold Clara's hand and tell her she was doing great, even though great felt like a wildly inadequate word for what she was going through. But finally, just after midnight, I heard it. The first cry. A nurse placed the baby in Clara's arms. A girl, small and red-faced and absolutely perfect, and I watched Clara's face transform into something I can't even describe. Pure wonder. Pure love. "Hi," Clara whispered to the baby, tears streaming down her face. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm your mom." I couldn't speak. I just stood there, one hand on Clara's shoulder, staring at this tiny person we'd somehow made, and felt the world tilt on its axis. The nurse asked if I wanted to hold her, and I nodded, terrified and awed in equal measure. She placed the baby in my arms, and I looked down at her tiny fingers curled into fists, at her eyes squinting against the light, at the way she settled against my chest like she belonged there. "She's beautiful," I managed. "She is," Clara said, her voice thick with exhaustion and joy. What should we name her? We'd talked about names, thrown around ideas, but never settled on anything definite. But looking at her now, there was only one that felt right. "Grace," I said. Clara smiled. "Grace. I love it." The first few weeks were a blur. Sleepless nights, endless feedings, the constant low-level anxiety that we were somehow doing it all wrong. But we figured it out, the way I guess everyone does. One day, 1 hour, one moment at a time. Clara was a natural. She'd been terrified she wouldn't be, that she'd somehow fail at this too. But watching her with Grace, I saw something I'd always known, but she'd needed to discover for herself. She was more than capable. She was extraordinary. And me? I was learning. Learning how to change a diaper at 3 in the morning, how to soothe a crying baby when Clara was too exhausted to move, how to function on 2 hours of sleep and still manage the farm. It was hard, harder than I'd expected, but it was also the most purposeful I'd ever felt. On a Saturday morning, when Grace was about 3 weeks old, I found Clara on the porch, the baby asleep in her arms. "You okay?" I asked, sitting down beside her. "Yeah." She looked down at Grace, then at me. I was just thinking about the night I showed up here, how desperate I was, how certain I was that if I didn't fix everything immediately, I'd lose it all. And now? She smiled. Now I realize I had it backwards. I didn't need to fix anything. I just needed to stop pretending I had to do it alone. I reached over and brushed a strand of hair out of her face. "You're not alone. I know." She leaned into me, careful not to wake the baby. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, you know, for this to feel temporary or fragile or like something I have to fight to keep, but it doesn't. It just feels steady." "Good," I said. "It should." We sat there for a while, the three of us watching the morning sun spill across the fields. The cattle grazed in the distance. The air smelled like grass and earth and the promise of another simple, steady day. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't some grand, sweeping romance. It was just us. Just this. And somehow that was more than enough. Grace stirred in Clara's arms, making a small sound, and Clara looked down at her with so much love, it almost hurt to witness. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me a place to land." She met my eyes. "For not asking me to be anything other than what I was. For just staying." I thought about that night she'd shown up at my door, exhausted, desperate, asking for something impossible, and I thought about how neither of us could have predicted this, that a moment of desperation would turn into something real, something lasting. "I'll always stay," I said, and I meant it. The sun climbed higher. Grace yawned. Clara rested her head on my shoulder. And in the quiet of that morning I understood something I'd maybe always known, but had never put into words. Love doesn't fix everything. It doesn't erase the past or guarantee the future, but it holds you steady when everything else is uncertain. It reminds you that you don't have to carry it all alone, and sometimes that's enough to change everything.